Hey, good morning, everybody. I had a great conversation this week with Peter Dunbar from Mead. Now, he's coming down from Tallahassee to speak at Space Coast Communities Association's January program. Remember, that's always the third Saturday at Comfort Inn, and I'm really looking forward to it. We went into a lot of topics on this, a lot of questions on new laws that just went in force, and laws that are possibly coming down the pike to possibly rectify some of the issues that were brought about in the drastic changes that happened in the most recent legislative term. So make sure you bring all your questions because he's going to be leaving a lot of time for Q&A on how these issues are going to impact your communities.
It's important to remember that these communities are basically creatures of law, and those that stand in to give their time and service to run them need to be careful to run them correctly, run them consistent with the law, and avoid problems that might expose them to personal liability. So we're definitely going to be talking about how best for officers and directors, managers as well, to engage in these activities and not misstep along the way that creates problems either for the community or for the individuals personally.
What are some specifics that you are seeing right now that you think are a real danger, a real risk that board members need to understand?
One of the things we've learned from history, and I've now been at this for about 40 years, is that the legislature has a tendency to address these laws almost every year. They did it in 2017, but they did it in a very awkward way. So now we have questions about board member term limits, how we keep our records, what a board can do for hiring counsel, for keeping their records, posting and creating websites. And a lot of that information in last year's law or requirements in last year's law is confusing and in some cases inconsistent. Hopefully we're going to provide some clarity for the confusing parts and point out where the inconsistencies might be able to be resolved.
Awesome. What are some of the biggest misconceptions that you're seeing right now, either with current law, proposed law, or the new changes that have just come down?
One of the biggest concerns is when and for how long are board members eligible to serve? One of the confusing pieces in last year's enactment that took effect on October the 1st is a term limit requirement on board members, particularly board members that have been elected to a 2-year term. So how that's going to be implemented if you're affected by it, what type of clarity so you will know who in your community is eligible to run and for how long they're eligible to serve probably is the number one item at the top of the list. Second item is this. It is not uncommon for the professionals giving legal advice to a community represent both the management company and the community. And that's been changed in this year's legislation or in the 2017 legislation so that if the law firm or the lawyer is representing the management company, it is not permissible for the board to hire that lawyer to provide services for the association. Additionally, there's a lot of confusion about the requirement of the website that has a delayed effective date and is, I think, going to be changed, but it's almost impossible and very expensive to implement. So how you might be able to navigate that if your community is affected by it gets to be an important financial decision.
What are you expecting in the current legislation term?
Well, one of the things that's a little difficult to predict is the folks from Dade County who were the sponsors of this bill, and Senator Garcia remains in the Senate, believes that a lot of these things were important. While it affects in unintended ways other parts of the state. That being said, I do think that there will be at least one of the pieces of legislation in each house that will begin to move through the process probably next week, and maybe just before we have our meeting in Cocoa Beach, that will begin to correct the website issue, term limits issue, and some of the inconsistencies on what type of service providers you can, as a board, hire to do work in your community.
Brian Stevens, he is the local representative here in Brevard Counties in Viera. He's going to speak a little bit at this as well on records access requirements. Is that a big deal? Is there a lot of questions or changes?
Well, Brian is one of the three lawyers in the firm's Melbourne Viera office who deals with community associations quite a bit. Records can be a problem. Now, there are changes in the law that happened in 2017 to be aware of that he will be sharing, and also talking about procedurally how you must make these records available to your residents, because failing to do that can subject you to, or the association, to financial penalties and other types of problems, which can be easily avoided if you know the right steps to take. But if you are not following the law correctly, the potential for financial exposure is definitely present. The idea would be, let's help communities find a way to do it the right way so it is not a problem.
Great. Is there legislation that you're seeing upcoming that either associations need to prepare for or they need to be speaking to their representatives and get an understanding on?
I think the most important thing that Space Coast and its members can do is talk to their legislators about correcting the problems that were created in last year's legislation. As I mentioned, there is a conflict on who actually can perform services, who can be contracted with to provide those services, and we don't have a clear understanding of what the term limits provision means. We also have this tremendous problem overhanging communities that have 50 condominiums or more on how and to what extent they have to implement a website by July the 1st of 2018. Very expensive, potentially, and a big problem for communities that are not large already. And those are the ones that you would want this year's legislature to be fixing.
I see a lot of associations that do have a website, however, it's through their management company, sort of as a sub-page. Is that okay with the way the law is written, or would those pages have to go away as well?
Unfortunately, it is not enough for those websites, at least most of them that are currently in place, particularly the ones that you just described, because the mandate in last year's law requires it to be totally in the control of the association, accessible by password only by the members of the association, and not accessible by anyone else other than employees that have been given that authority. So if it's being maintained by a management company or if it's by other type of web service, it may not meet the confidentiality requirements and the quality for the website, which is part of what contributes to what estimates turns out to be pretty expensive estimates to create and maintain the website.
50 is not that large for a condo association, and there's plenty that could be $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 at a minimum to put up and maintain a website that follows those requirements. So I could see that.
Yes, and I've heard estimates that it's somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000. Now, whether your number of 3 versus what I've heard between 10 and 20, either of those is, I think, in many people's minds, excessive and unnecessary, as long as the records, which we were talking about earlier, are made available correctly and the community is made aware and has access to the activities of their board. The expense is a big deal.
Peter, I also understand you have 2 books that are now in their 15th and 11th editions, Condominium Concepts. Every management office I seem to go into has the newest edition. You will be signing those prior to the meeting starting, so anybody who has one of those, come early. I appreciate your time today. I will see you on the 20th.
I will, Trevor. I'm looking forward to doing it. For those that already have them, I'm happy to sign the ones they bring. I'll also have a few with me, so if they want to get them while they're there, we'll deal with that too.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Peter.
Okay, Trevor. Thank you.